You are listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. Sustainable World Radio brings you in-depth interviews, news, and commentary about positive solutions to environmental challenges. Solutions that adhere to the permaculture ethics of earth care, people care, fair share. Are you interested in learning more about permaculture projects around the globe? How to plant a food forest? Restorative design or ethnobotany? Then stay tuned for Sustainable World Radio. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to announce that I've partnered with Meliadora Publishing to give away a copy of Rosemary Morrow's excellent book, Earth Restorer's Guide to Permaculture. The winner of the book will also receive a collection of other titles from this ethical publishing house. The promotion starts today, June 2nd, 2023, and ends on June 9th, 2023. One winner will be selected at random and will be notified by email. The giveaway is open to listeners living in Australia and the U.S. only due to shipping purposes. You can visit the link in my show notes to enter. Good luck, and I hope you enjoy this interview with Rosemary Morrow. My guest today is Rosemary Morrow, permaculture designer, teacher, home gardener, inspirational human, and earth restorer. Rosemary trained in agricultural science at Sydney University, rural sociology at the Sorbonne in Paris, development at Reading, UK, and horticulture at TAFE. Rosemary is the author of numerous publications, including Permaculture Teaching Matters and The Earth Restorer's Guide to Permaculture. She is the co-founder of the Blue Mountains Permaculture Institute and Permaculture for Refugees. Welcome to the show, Rosemary.
Thank you very much.
Rosemary and I are also going to be joined in just a bit by Margie Bushman and Wes Roe of the Santa Barbara Permaculture Network. Margie, Wes, and Rosemary are great friends, have been friends for quite some time, and this is the first time that they're going to be connecting in quite a while. So we're waiting for Margie and Wes to join our call. Before they join the call, I wanted to read their short bios. Margie Bushman and Wes Roe founded the South Coast Permaculture Guild after attending a PDC, or Permaculture Design course, with Bill Mollison in 1997. In the year 2000, they created the Santa Barbara Permaculture Network, an educational nonprofit that has sponsored hundreds of workshops and events about permaculture, ecological design, and sustainability in the Santa Barbara and Southern California region. Together, they teach an invisible structures component of the 72-hour permaculture design course they are proud to have helped launch at Santa Barbara City College. And Margie and Wes were founding members and volunteer coordinators for the International Permaculture Convergences support group, and are founding board members of the Friends of the International Permaculture Convergences. Learn more about their work at sbpermaculture.org.
Hang on, here we are.
Margie, how good to see you.
See you too.
Well, this is fantastic to see you. It's taken a lot to get there. It's taken Jill to bring us together.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm really relieved about that. That's fabulous. I was delighted when she suggested it and you accepted. So thank you so much. How have you been?
We've been wonderful. We weathered through pandemic, COVID, 2 years and stayed very healthy. And it wasn't until last month that we finally got COVID and it kind of took us down. But we were really good with our programs. We did really some adaptive things as we went through that and kept putting on different programs and events. So we came through it pretty good.
Yeah.
How about where you were?
Not bad at all. I think Australia did quite well in general. We had different states with different reactions, but on the whole, no, I've just been in Portugal with a group of refugees. Portuguese have got the best program, global program in the world for refugees at the moment.
Wow.
And we're getting another 20. So, we never thought about it. We knew that we knew that we were teaching refugees permaculture because that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years or so in camps and settlements around the world, and establishing that they really want it and need it and value it and use it long after the teaching's finished. However, we didn't think that permaculturists would become refugees. That was short-sighted. So we've been working with the people from the Ukraine and the Afghans in particular. So these were permaculturists doing good work at home who are now forced out of their borders, or some are still inside, and we're supporting them very quietly because we don't want to put them in danger. But that's what, and I wrote the book in COVID, and it was a real discipline. It wasn't a love. It was something I felt was needed at this time based on the experience I'd had. So I did that, and I got sick of sitting at a desk and looking at a computer.
Right. You kind of predicted, like many others, that we would all be potentially refugees. It's possible, and that we needed to get prepared.
Yes, I mean, look at your state in particular, where you've had the fires. You've had IDPs, a special form of refugees, internally displaced people. The country best set up in the world for IDPs are the Philippines. They're brilliant because they've got every disaster you can imagine. Right. They get volcanoes and earthquakes and civil war and bombings, and I mean, it just never stops there. And we have had 30,000 displaced recently with floods. Oh. And before that, we had 12 million hectares burnt out, 5 billion animals of all types, small, little ones. It's lost, maybe local extinction. So, animals become IDPs too. And it's a huge thing. Animal populations move. The floods are going to cost more than the fires, ultimately. I never thought I'd see rivers change course in my lifetime. Oh, wow. I've read about rivers, and I know that they can sometimes flow over their banks, and I've seen floods, but I didn't actually see them change course. I thought that was geological time. And everywhere in the world, I've seen nothing but environmental degradation. Really, the latest was Portugal, and they're saying it's becoming, the Sahara's moving into the Iberian Peninsula. So it's all pretty hard stuff. And I just hold tightly to my flagpole, here's my flagpole, that people must know what to do where they are and where they can. And that permaculture is the best thing we've got for that. So that's sort of where it's all taken me. I was remembering the fun we had at various IPCs, didn't we? Remember Malawi? Yes. Very interesting. Well, yeah.
My favorite memory is on the Amazon, and I just loved the IPC in Brazil, and then chugging up the river to the Ali's Jungle Permaculture Center, and you and I on the back, hanging off the back, trying to do dishes, and you were hanging over the edge,
and really the old boat. And reading how they constantly get drowned because the river was 100 miles wide where the two Amazon, black and white Amazon met or something, and that we could go over in a big storm, and that the pilots had never been out of Manaus Harbour, and the only thing someone produced was a National Geographic map of the Amazon. And no one knew. We got lost for a while. It was hilarious and wonderful.
We share these stories. We teach in IPC, at a PDC at our local community college, and then a couple of other places where there's youth. And we always said travel is the best teacher. And these IPCs are absolutely the best teacher because you travel in an entirely different way. and you have experiences like the ones we had, which we'll never forget that. And not just because it was so close, so edgy and close to the edge. And we were all fearless, really. None of us were panicking in the way we should have. We should have been panicking, but it was, you'll never have that travel experience any other way, I don't think.
No,
So
it was fantastic. And when the sun was over the yard arm, we'd all go up the top, and Brock would pour us all some terrible gin and lemon or something. We'd buy fruit from the little markets. It was fantastic. Yes.
Tony
It was
Anderson and Brock were, yeah, too.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was fabulous.
As you can imagine, there was a lot of reminiscing going on. And so I turned the record button off so this would not be the longest episode ever. And right now we're going to jump into the interview with Rosemary Morrow, Margie Bushman, and Wes Roe. Rosemary, one of your bios online says that you were, quote, claimed early by the earth, plants, animals, stones, and weather. And I just wanted to say that's such a beautiful sentence and image, and would be a really nice opening to a poem. Can you share with us how it feels and how it felt to be claimed by the natural world?
I think it's a slow recognition, because when you're a child, you're really just being yourself. But growing up in Western Australia, Mediterranean climate, like where you are, we ran around in bare feet, and the present parent upbringing then, where people had 4, 5, and 6 children, was children don't belong inside. Children belong outside. Outside, everyone. Here are some sandwiches outside under the tree, and they finally quickly come in and have a bath before Dad comes home from work. So I found pretty quickly that I was never happier than when I was actually in the soil and in the dirt and with my shoes off and playing all sorts of games, a wide range of them. And that's continued, so that I've had a few days inside recently. And yesterday I found I wanted to go out and sit in the dirt again and just do some weeding. I didn't want to do it from a distance. I wanted to be getting dirty fingernails and rough skin and all that. It draws me very, very strongly. I think not liking much being in plains is because I'm away from the dirt or the earth, or I think I live in a miracle. That's an adult understanding of what it is to be alive and appreciate the natural environment.
It's beautiful. And for listeners who are just beginning in permaculture or don't really know what it is, can you share your definition of permaculture?
Yeah, well, it's very difficult. I wish you'd asked Wes and Margie for that, because it's very hard. And most of them are so abstract that at the end, people say, oh, yeah, okay, good, thanks. Because it's something like permaculture is a design process for the rehabilitation of companies and landscapes using da-da-da-da-da. And at the end, you've no idea, landscape architects design the landscape. So finally, I hit it when I thought permaculture is a series of principles and techniques that allows people to restore landscapes and societies in ways that are beneficial to both. And restore, I think, has clearer, they'll have as many meetings, understandings as heads listening to it, but restore means somehow make things better. And when I thought about it, everything from a vegetable garden to planting a forest to bringing in local monetary systems and ethical money, they're all about restoring people and place. And that finally, after nearly 40 years of permaculture, is my definition. It's a restorative practices that give life to people and place or regenerate. And I felt really content with that, because I'm thinking all the time about the person receiving what you're talking about. Might be a learner or listener. Yeah. You could tell me what it meant to you, or Margie and Wes can say, because I don't know whether that definition of permaculture as a restorative discipline and systems means something to them more than all other definitions.
I really like your definition. Do you want to share yours, Margie and Wes?
We are very fond of this, and it's not ours, but we really love it. It's permaculture, a design system that reconciles human communities with the ecological imperatives of a living planet. And that was by Santa Fe permaculture designer, teacher Ben Haggard. And then I also like the thing that refers to that it's a global movement, and of all kinds of educators, researchers, organizers, and it's taking place around the world, that it is a global movement.
It is. It's probably the biggest underground movement that's happening right across the world, but we don't know. They say at any moment 6,000 PDCs are taking place. And I can tell you where some of them are. They're not in places you'd think about. Yeah, I like that. Well, I hadn't heard those. I've been stuck on the old ones. Yeah, that's terrific. So people have a choice so long as there's some picture in their mind of what can be possible if you're starting. Mm-hmm.
And Rosemary, I think permaculture is really rare in that it has ethics. So earth care, people care, fair share. And I remember Wes actually introduced me to permaculture at a garden project that we were working on together, Kale Not Jail, at the juvenile hall. And I remember reading through the designer's manual. And when I read the ethics, I just thought, oh, I found my people. There's other people like me. And so can you tell us why it was so unusual for permaculture co-founders David Holmgren and Bill Mollison to include a set of ethics in permaculture in the 1970s? And what kind of impact do you think these ethics have had on permaculture as a whole?
Big question, but I think back in the early 70s, ethics belonged to ethicists, and they was not seen as applied very often, except in the medical profession and possibly nurses, doctors, and pharmacists. But even scientists didn't have ethical committees to look at their work, so terrible things were done to animals. I think what hit me was I could test everything in permaculture against the ethics. The principles are important, but they can change over time. Perhaps some will drop in and some will drop out. There's not a sacred number or order. But finally, if you just look at the ethics, you've just got to say, I'm ethical or I'm not. And I think what was exciting for me was the fact that to live an ethical life seemed the biggest adventure. The biggest thing you could do. I'm not there. I haven't even looked like getting there, but it's fun trying, because every day you're hit with all those, slight challenges and things you make where you do something you mightn't like or something. But it seems to me an ethical life is the one that's worth living, and then to live it through practicing permaculture is a great adventure. You live adventurously through that. It's not prescriptive. If someone said recently it's the principles, and I thought, no. And we showed how the principles could be applied to a new coal mine. Work where it counts, catch and store energy. It all looked good. And then you thought, no, ultimately you have to go back to those ethics. And they're your touchstone. And I really like the ones that say reduce consumption and distribute surplus to need. And that's the weakest in European type cultures. They do it very poorly by comparison with more communal cultures. And still not quite getting it that that's the one they need to step up on, whether it's vaccines or money or information, anything. But yeah, I think it's just such fun to think about living ethically.
It is. Yes, that cooperation piece, I think, right, is the challenge for us. And you also say, and this, you kind of alluded to this right now, but that part of the reason that permaculture is so fluid and malleable and adaptive is it works from principles and not techniques. Do you want to mention anything about that?
Yeah, well, it seems to me that it would be so easy to be prescriptive and say you have to have the lemon tree at the back door and you have to catch water from your house roof. And in fact, if you live in a 30-story building, that may not be possible. So if you say we're going to catch and store energy or bring food production back to the cities, which is one Bill said years ago and has never been more true than now, then you've got something to work from. How you do it, becomes bioregional and local. That belongs to Tokyo or Moscow or New York or Dhaka. But how they do it will be their way. But the fact of doing it is the important thing. And I think that's the value of the principles as starting places for thinking. I don't know whereas I can realize I could have the most wonderful conversation now with Wes and Margie, because they've been in it long enough and thought about it so much that you get that real collegiate exchange of information. It can be a bit lonely sometimes if you're saying to a group of young teachers, what do you think? And they say, I don't know, I haven't thought about that. So I'm a bit hungry to have more conversation with them. What do you think about principles and ethics? Where's my... Okay.
Yeah, I'm surrounded by knowledge in this call. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We are challenged, like you talk about, living day by day with ethics. But when I wake up every day, it's like I walk outside with my bare feet, no matter what the temperature is. I look up around me and I go, that's another day to kind of try to live, from my soul, to try to live and grow. And each day is like that. And it's very powerful. And the collective knowledge that I've had, I'm blessed with being around over the years, so many amazing teachers. It's like osmosis. They're part of me. And it's the part I can share, not just me with other people. I can share this collective knowledge. And it's beautiful. And it's always good to tap into. Margie and I love to bring speakers here because it gives us a chance to kind of fill our souls up again with information and knowledge and feeling, and then approach it in a different way sometimes as each day. So it's beautiful to be in that place.
Margie, do you want to say anything?
What are you thinking about ethics and principles?
I just value permaculture presenting what it does and making all these things possible. When we finish teaching we teach the invisible structures part of the course. And when we finish with that, the students who came in very devastated many times by the bleak picture that seems to be the future. And all of a sudden they light up, and it's because of this gift. And part of it would be the ethics, that there is something with ethics, or very grateful to permaculture and that it has this format, and that it has attracted people like you, Rosemary, to do this as your work. Both Wes and I live very simply. We're already there. We started that in our early 20s. And so that part that you mentioned earlier, that not many people have that, we've mastered it. We're good on that one. But I recently watched Bill Mollison speaking again, and I remember him saying that at our 1997 permaculture design course, that what motivates him is anger, and which of course was shocking to his audience. And he said he just felt a fury. And what he went on to say was, what I feel many times is so much of this is so doable. And I think I heard you say that we're lagging behind, and we're just continuing not to step forward and do this. And most of these solutions are not that difficult. And I think sometimes I go there, I get very frustrated in the fury. I love hearing Bill Mollison admit to that.
And for those who may not know, Bill Mollison was one of the co-founders of permaculture.
As he observed populations around the world suffering from bad design, essentially, of this system that we have that extracts things from somewhere, uses it up, and then makes a waste product of it somewhere else. And that's been the model for many, many years. And that we have not, there are ways to go around that. And there's many, many people showing the way. And yet we seem to be stuck, And Wes and I, again, 20 years of this, and at the Santa Barbara Community College, City College, it was lighting up those 18, 19, 20-year-olds so that they could see a life path that was something, in other words, they could create a life around that. And you should have seen how the excitement they felt when they went, that they could make that their life. So I just wish that we would, there, as we all know, there's so much permaculture going on around the world. And I just wish that we would it would click in, and we would begin to not have this negative impact. And we're all, as you said so many times, we're all going to be facing this negative impact very, very soon.
Well, on that note, Rosemary, you have been teaching permaculture in places that you call crowded margins, including refugee camps, and in areas greatly impacted by climate change. And what drew you initially to working in these places, and why do you feel that permaculture is a good fit for refugee camps around the world?
Well, it's a good fit for anyone. But when we consider which people in the world are among the most disadvantaged and the most ignored, no one chooses to be a refugee. No matter what they say, it's all very well talk about economic refugees. But if you look at the state of Sudan and the Congo, you would be wise to leave if you were there. It is both dangerous and degraded. You haven't got a choice of staying and making it valuable because the conflicts are too big. So I think what hit me was, if it works in post-war zones, as in Vietnam and Cambodia, why shouldn't it work for refugees and other displaced people? That was my query, and that's when I got some money from Quakers and started my trek over the last 5 years to 11 different camps and organisations, and Islamists and Buddhists and Christians and Orthodox Christians and non-Christians and people from Syria and Yemen and Rohingya, and to see if this was true. And luckily they backed me. So it wasn't an expensive project. And from that, we just put out a big report called Outcomes. And we taught permaculture. And you would wonder what could happen from a 2-week course, because really it's ridiculous, isn't it? 72 hours or 2 weeks is just stupid, really, to change a life. You think medicine takes young people 5 or 6 years. And so we gave them $2,000 when we left. And instead of saying, count how many farmers grow lettuces or beans or whatever is the usual development model for accountability for money, we just said, tell us what you do with this. We got the most extraordinary results. And in many, many cases, you'd say they spent more than $2,000. So everything from posters in Kabul, riding bicycles through town to plant a garden, get seeds here, to young people making films and taking them to Rohingya language schools, and the Chin and the other ethnic groups that are now having to leave. You don't hear about them as much, leave Myanmar. To the people from Syria and Yemen, people seized on it. Many reasons, not all of them around food and improvement and environment. Some of them, if you have to sit in a blue tent all day with your 6 children, and you're not allowed to do anything much, and there are guards on the gate and there are 50,000 people in the camp, what do? It hit some of the men hardest. They said, I had a life, I was a farmer, I was a French teacher, I was a nurse, I was a something. Here I am nothing. So their being and their person is taken away. Then you start saying, well, you could teach this and you could show people how to manage the grey water and the dirty water, and you can have shade and you can have windbreaks and all this is possible. Suddenly something happens and I say, well, I could too. And suddenly it's away. So there's all that it was seized, not only for reasons for environment, but reasons for the tragedy of being unjustly imprisoned, often for 20 years or more in Lebanon, and having something worthwhile to do and valuable. Sometimes earn an income, sometimes not. But it was the thing that everyone could do. So teaching French or English or computers, they failed. People would start in the classes and walk away. There was no immediate result. Giving people seed and saying, get on with it, according to the plan of your tent or wherever you live, 3 feet outside the front door or a filthy drain, people say, yes, I can do that. So there was a whole lot of foreseeable application in people's lives. I didn't tell them, I'd ask them because I didn't know what they could do. And in 2 weeks, we're still getting reports from people. As for young people I taught in the Balearic Islands years ago are doing fantastic things in those islands. Seems to me the young ones are the ones we need, and Perma Youth is doing brilliantly. And recently, the young refugees, they're the 14 to 26 whom we've got out of Afghanistan and Pakistan into Portugal, they are brilliant. It's like a runaway horse. They seize it and they're away. It's always greater and bigger than your imagination can be. So we think that we've got something extraordinarily valuable. The idea would be that the UN and other refugee organisations that run camps, such as Red Cross, Red Crescent, World Vision, would pick this up. And in effect, we're starting next week for a local NGO to train all the NGOs working in the camps of Bangladesh. They'll have permaculture, and from that, we will see what happens when you train NGO staff in camps. Because we started teaching the refugees, but they couldn't access the resources as well. They couldn't get permissions for things. The people who can are those people who presently work in separate little rooms about health or education or school or human rights or whatever they get. Now we're going to bring them together, and this will be the first experiment. And if it works, we're hoping to have more money to let this NGO go big in their training next 2 years. So, they're exciting. I don't know. I'm right off topic, aren't I? You'll have to cut off.
No, it's great. It's inspiring and gives me hope.
If I have a group of Australians, they sit there and think, I don't know if I want to do this, and maybe next summer, and I'll have to do some research. People in need find that cup or plastic bag and fill it with leaves and turn it into thing and start growing beans at their door or on their roof or in their window or on their beds, wherever they can. There's this difference between having the luxury to think whether you want to do it and you're meant to do it and this is what I'm meant to do, and whether it triggers something or whether there's a need and you just do it. And it's what happens under situations of great suffering, really, and need, but it also picks up that spark of human spirit to someone says, I can do this. I'm away. I'm going home tonight. I'm going to do it. So it's very different, but very, very wonderful, really, to have permaculture as that particular spark that can get things going in so many ways.
And, Rosemary, I read something, I don't know if it was in your book or online, but you were saying how, what if we could change the narrative of disaster risk reduction to design for resilience and regeneration? So I think that's so brilliant to kind of flip it, and then it would benefit all of us to be doing this now, even if we aren't meant to do it. We have the luxury of thinking that way.
Well, I'm going even further on that. I have watched permaculture go from permanence. That was Mollison, and I think I know the papers he and David looked at. Then to sustainability, well, we lost that one when we're using, how many worlds by August or something for resources and our children's resources. And then we've got resilience, which is picked up a lot more easily by Westerners. However, what I'm thinking now is where people have had multiple disasters, one after the other, there is no recovery time. And what does resilience mean when you have the mouse plague that goes through your granary and all your wheat is contaminated? What does it mean when you then go through the drought, then through the huge fires? So you're getting into years of it, and then you get the floods, and then you get COVID. And something like that happened in a town in Australia. It's probably happened in California. You would have had multiple disasters and less recovery time, and that's the future. So I'm even weaning myself off resilience to adapt restore and adapt, or adapt restoratively, or restore adaptively. But resilience almost implies that thing that gets cut off at the base and then grows again, and then grows again and grows again. I think that's fine, never to give up, but nature will give up. And if we're dealing with food systems and safety, then we have to look at what's adaptive. What is it going to be next, and are we adapted? So I'm thinking of sort of restorative adaptation. And that comes out of the IPCC too. You know, the International Panel on Climate Change is saying, get into adaptation as quickly as you can. Resilience might be doing the same. So that's what I'm thinking about at the moment, is how do we adapt, and what do we adapt to?
Well, that really leads me into the next question, which we all have the potential in these times to become refugees due to climate chaos, upheaval, pandemics, just the list of things you were saying. And my question was, what are some of the first steps we can take to increase our resiliency? But I'm changing that to our adaptability, to prepare for possible change. And so are the steps that we take to increase our adaptability similar to would they have the same immediate impact on nature restoration if we're implementing those in our own lives?
Yeah, I think it's a really important thing. You know, one of the permaculture principles has been observe and adapt, which is sometimes observe and intervene. But I think if you observe closely enough, and people are becoming more and more illiterate, ecologically illiterate. I can see trees dying here that have been here for years, and it's the wet, not the dry. And I can see what's growing in their place. We probably have to let them grow and not say what we've had for 1,000 years should rest. We actually have to try to restore that structure, because the structure is responsible for climate stability. So we can't automatically scale down, because that will mean a different sort of climate. So the big trees and the huge forests have their functions to play, and so do the woodlands. So we have to put those there adaptively, and that can only be done with very good observation. And the other thing is, we used to say, take the longest possible time to take weather averages, and you'll end up with a climate model. So you'd look at 100 years. Now I think we have to look at 30 years, because the extremes are so great in that we're looking at a different average. We're not looking at the average of 100, because that will dampen it all down. We're looking at an average where global warming has been accelerating, and we have to look at those years when it's been accelerating. It won't be quite as reliable, but it's somewhere we need to go. And the first things we'd be looking at are our needs: food, water, houses, health, and looking at those in terms of adaptive behaviours for something that could be harder or more challenging or different. And I think we can do that. We know that we may have to stop, with the rain we've had here for the last 2 years, probably stop growing lettuces that get slime and fungus, and turn more to some Asian vegetables that don't. So I think that's okay. The information's out there, and somewhere in the book I've tried to put it down about coastal communities and the Middle East water collection. And it was interesting, because I was recently in Western Australia, which is a Mediterranean climate. At the end of a talk there, and also in Portugal, someone said, no more open dams then. And I said, I think you're probably right. The amount of evaporation and the heat has got so great that you have to build a dam 7 times the size that you need the water for that to be evaporated to have usable water. So maybe we're going to go for deeper holes in the ground and cover water. We're going to make dams and systems more like wetlands and protection and ecosystems. Think of ecosystems, so that would be protective windbreaks and screening water so it's clean. I think we have changed things in permaculture design, but also in our thinking. But I think for Mediterranean areas, if we're going to become more like the Middle East or parts of America, where I think Indigenous Native Americans had very fine systems, we have to look at those and learn and start getting them there soon rather than late. acting now is going to save a lot of pain.
Margie and Wes, do you want to say anything?
I don't know if this fits in right now, but what we have in our programs, or what we started a couple of years ago, as we call it, the three doables. And it's the doable here and doable now. And in other words, when we're thinking about climate and what's occurring, and the three doables, one is the beaver, which we're reintroducing to our lands, that restoration of wetlands, and that they're an amazing carbon sink. And then, of course, restoration of the soils, so carbon farming, and then marine permaculture, which we see shows up in your book, which was missing out of the permaculture world before. It wasn't as considered, but we're working with someone, and we brought programs around marine permaculture, where restoring our coastal kelp forest will be have a huge impact if we can do that. All three of those things are doable here and doable now, and that's kind of our main messaging and slogan at the moment. And a lot of it's taking off in our community. So there are quite, the beaver, we're really in with many other organizations around restoring beavers to our lands, and that could change things dramatically. And carbon farming, we've been working with others for many years. And then this marine permaculture that we're very, very excited about. And would be interesting, Rosemary, to hear what you're addressing around the marine environment.
Yeah, it's huge, because I think most of the people on Earth live within 100 miles of the sea or something. I know that sounds incredible, but you look at the dense delta populations around the world, find hundreds of million people living in and around deltas and coastal areas. So they all become enormously vulnerable. So the first thing is ocean rise, and Bangladesh has got the best disaster preparation materials about that. They've specialised in it. 75% of the country is a metre or less above sea level. So they've had to, that and cyclones. They've done a lot. Secondly, I think what we're looking at really hard is port and port cities as polluting centres in a very big way, and who's doing really good work to make them interesting recreational spaces as well as functional ones. And the third one is ocean national parks, and keeping a lot of things out of them, because it's hard to restore things like kelp forests. They will do it themselves if given the chance. It's a bit like a landscape will restore if you get rid of the things that are so destructive, whether it's rabbits or goats or whatever. So I think this is some of the way we're looking at it, but also I'm thinking we have to tell some people they need to think about moving. Some people need to think about moving. For that, you look up the IPCC and have a look at what's happening in different coastal areas, how fast it's being eroded by. The sea is only responding to what humans do, nothing more. There's no malevolence in the ocean. There's no malevolence in a cyclone. It is just nature responsive to human intervention in cycles. So we're doing different things in different places. In the tropics, it has to be mangroves. And places like Vietnam are putting back immense mangrove forests. And also some of the coastal Malaysia, dependent heavily on their coastal countries, it has to go back. I think the chapter in my book is an introduction, and someone is going to have to write the big book, because it differs in different latitudes and east and west of continents. So there's an awful lot to think about, but I just wanted to open it up to thoughts and also take criticism of anything that I've written there. And what's missing in the book as well to do with oceans is there's nothing on islands, both lagoon islands, coral islands, and volcanic islands. And I feel bad about that, because I've been collecting data, but it was just too hard to get it together to get it in. But someone has to write that chapter of permaculture for islands, which will be very different from what Bill and David did in the early days.
This is so interesting. So, Rosemary, You say that, or you write that permaculture has its challenges and yet still provides the best option. So all these things we're talking about, these changes that we haven't faced due to climate change, and you think that permaculture provides the best option for us to meet the demands of our unpredictable future. And I think you've answered this maybe with what you've been talking about in this interview, but can you just say a bit about why you're so confident in permaculture's potential in earth restoration and creating a more abundant world for all? And by all, I also refer to non-humans, right? Not just us.
I think if you look at what a design can do, you can take a continent. So if you took the United States, you'd put back all the coastal forests in all their range and variety. And then you'd cover all the mountains so that water and soils are held as recharge areas for the rest. And then you do the steep slopes, and then you protect all your rivers with buffer zones and littoral forests. You'd do that, and then you'd look at the rest and where it would be the most valuable pieces of land for use and productivity and protection. You'd cover 45% or more of the continent, because that's a David Suzuki figure, with perennial crops and things, so to stabilise climate to some extent, even though overflow. It's a way of thinking. So I'm drawing on all the time my understanding in permaculture. And I think the limits of permaculture are glacial melting. It's too late. The only thing I can ever think of is people living in those valleys in the way of melting glaciers along the Himalayan edge. Is really fast message systems and probably move. For coastal, it can't do it. I think we have to work very closely with institutions, which is why I've talked about the UN SDGs and planetary boundaries, which approximate those original global challenges we discuss in permaculture. And I believe there's nothing else like permaculture that gives you, so I just talked about how to design a continent. You could also design your local government area. And, you could take those principles and restore your rivers and get back to clean water and do those things. It simply takes an understanding and commitment, but I can also do it on my little block of land. And someone can do it in an apartment building, as the people in Hong Kong were leading. And they were turning the bottom 3 floors of 80-story buildings into waste nurseries, secondhand shops, opportunity shops, coffee places, growing places. So all those basic floors could be turned in, and some could be turned into water saving and recycling. You could think of those big buildings as communities stood upright and manage those things and give them. I don't know anything else that people study which gives you a design approach to the natural environment, the cultivated environment, the built environment, and how people live. And all of them based on ethics, and ultimately it's nurture natural systems and nurture humans so they can flourish. We don't have to control them. So it doesn't come across as a political system of control. It comes across as a system which provides care and ability for environments and people to thrive. Does anything else do it? I have looked for years. I'd abandon I'd jump ship if there were anything which did it as well. There hasn't been anything even approximated. Biodynamics is very good in its way, but it's still limited in what it offers a whole society. I don't know. I mean, if anyone else can tell me, I want to know. But there are now some wicked problems. And for permaculture to match up to those, we're going to need institutional and legal support as well. And for a while, permaculture said, let's just build the alternative and everyone will follow. Well, no, we need the economists and accountants to say there are 6 forms of capital, or there's the donut, and we need to actually have different measures of wealth and prosperity. And I think that's coming slowly, but it's coming. But they're the ones that are going to flip the change, and then people will say, well, there's permaculture. Mm-hmm.
We look forward to that day. And this is a question that Margie had for you, which is, what is the biggest misconception about permaculture that you see?
Now this is the one that makes me cross, Margie, and just annoyed after so long that people think it's growing vegetables in their garden, and that they don't see that you have a conscious restorative design function when you do it. No one grows vegetables in their garden without performing an environmentally restorative act. When you get rid of the lawnmower, get rid of the pesticides, and you build soil and you grow diversity to give home to insects, you've performed a lot of fairly progressive restorative acts. And yet it's sort of, well, they grow vegetables. I suppose it's a lot to ask people to understand more than one thing at a time. It seems to me they like one thing, and vegetable seems to be it. But it's so narrow that it is so much more and needs to be seen as so much more. So I get a little bit clenched jaw with that and think, bugger it, another one who says it's tomatoes and lettuces.
Oh my gosh. And really what we were talking about before I pushed record was that you don't need land to use permaculture in what you do.
There are all sorts of ways of using the environment. And so for many people, gardening in pots and containers, rice sacks in refugee camps give you those wonderful sack gardens with at least 10 different species in them. They are superb, and they're a way of getting rid of making compost and building sack gardens. They're terrific. Yeah, and hanging gardens where they take all those water bottles they handed out, and then a great big water bottle becomes top cut off and fix it, becomes a hanging garden. Everyone can get a bit of string and hang it from a wall. They just need to hang it from the right place, and they can cover a whole wall with hanging gardens. It's unlimited, really. Yes, you don't have to have that land.
I also, Rosemary, this is a question that I get a lot from listeners of all ages, and they're really interested in right livelihood or permaculture careers. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I think it's that that thing about get started and find out where you want to be and what you enjoy doing. I'm not that much of a good gardener. I like it. I prefer planting trees. I'd love to plant a huge forest. But most of all, I think even teaching and thinking about permaculture and being active where I am has become deeply satisfying as a way of spending my life. And I've done it for 40 years, and it still seems a good way to spend your life. But I also keep my garden going, but I'm not as good a gardener as others. And someone else will want to save heritage animals or plants, and someone else wants to grow the food forest. There's room for everyone, including those that are working on new monetary systems for people. So the number of niches is enormous in permaculture. It is huge. You can sit at your desk all day if that's what you want to do and play with your computer and be a very good permaculturist. You can write fabulous articles. We're missing on the journalists who are commenting on political stuff. We need the journalists, so every time governments make a statement about we need more fossil fuels, the journalist writes a considered policy reply. We do need the journalists desperately. We've got teachers, we've got designers, we've got doers. We need the media. We need in Washington and Canberra and London, making comments on government decisions.
We need TikTok.
I suppose I haven't seen it yet.
I barely have. So Rosemary, this is just a general question, but you consider permaculture to be sacred knowledge that is to be carried and shared with others. And so you have 40 years or over 40 years of teaching and working with others, teaching them permaculture. How many students do you think that you have taught permaculture to over the years?
No idea. I've got lists. I keep all their names and all the rest. There were 100 in the past 6 weeks. 2 of them were teacher training courses where we teach them the permaculture syllabus well, they teach themselves more in depth. And one was a PDC in Portugal for refugees and others. I don't count them. I don't know that it's a numbers game. I can tell you people who have made an impact, like those young people in the Balearic Islands and Mallorca. I can tell you about the Afghans who are doing it in Pakistan and teaching people around them. I can tell you about the people who picked up and run with it, but many I don't know. No idea who they are. So really, it's those people who grab it and run that are and they go further than me. So they've got better skills, better computer skills, better knowledge skills. They've got the skills for the future. There's the Morag Gambles, there's the, Precious Rumi. There are people everywhere who just go on and do things. And they're the ones that you just think, well, aren't you wonderful? Yeah. I'm now a back rower in the sense that I can't keep up with it all and don't try to all the time. But permaculture of sacred knowledge is because it leads back to the last thing I was saying. What else helps you restore life? So if we look at traditional indigenous systems, they kept ecosystems in good condition. They kept the water and the soil and the species, the three things that are ecosystem health. But often they didn't have to restore. So there were indigenous tribes in the United States. There have been the Panan in Borneo, indigenous Aboriginal people, the Rohingya, the people in the Rajasthan desert. All of them had rules about what you could take and what you could use and how much you could use, so that everything was conserved. But I don't know anyone that's done massive restoration of the sort of scale that permaculture could achieve if it were picked up and really, really applied. And that knowledge is across so many fields. It's quite wonderful when you think about it to hold that knowledge. You're a permaculturist, Jo?
I have just educated about it. So I'm the one doing podcasts about it. Probably since 2006, I think. I had a radio show and then have been podcasting about it.
Well, have you struck anything else that gives one individual or a group that huge, huge knowledge across so many fields for starting points and design principles that, you won't go very wrong? It's not like transplanting sheep to Australia or getting rid of the bison in America. It's something that's far more cautious and aware of where you are. So what else is restorative? I don't know.
I think it also, everyone can find something in permaculture that they are drawn to. And it's so hopeful. That's what I really love. And the ethics for me were really, I think that's such a good guide for our lives. So I think permaculture to me is hope.
Yeah. And Jill has created so many beacons of hope with everybody she interviews, because everybody gets knowledge a different way and they receive it a different way. And so by her presenting so many different ways, as Margie and I say, you teach one part, but you're always teaching the whole. And so it draws people in. So Jill's had that great way of reaching people around the world. And we would know that her program, when it used to be on the radio, KCSB, it was listened to in Europe. It was pretty amazing. She had such a big audience.
Africa too.
And Africa. Those were her two biggest audiences.
Now still. Yeah, it's great. And I was doing the radio show and Wes and Margie were my collaborators and frequent guests. And then I just Googled, how do you get a larger audience, and discovered podcasting. And so started putting it out in the early days of podcasting. So it's been wonderful to highlight people like you and David Holmgren and Darren Doherty and many, many people that are really doing good work in the world. And so, Rosemary, going back to what you just said, and we're almost at the end of our time, we've been on for quite a while, is you think that permaculture should be critiqued and updated from an emerging nation's perspective in order for it to remain relevant. And I really was intrigued, and I applauded the idea of Principle Zero. Can you speak a bit about that?
Well, it seems to me that permaculture had become stuck mainly, but not always, given places like East Africa and India, but it had become a little bit stuck in a European colonial thing with people like myself going to countries and doing courses and coming back. And it was right against the whole, flow of the times, which is that people do it themselves. So what do we need to learn from others that falls into the permaculture? Look, I talk about it being a bit of a skeleton, that some things are absolutely solid, the ethics and principles, the certain techniques are invaluable. When we say feed the soil, you do it differently in Ho Chi Minh City from a big farm, from the tropics, from a cool temperate. So all those ways become local. But there have been things happening in the world over hundreds of years, such as Middle Eastern water management, that have been neglected. And I think we need to pick some of them up and bring them back in for a difficult future. And we, I think, need to think more about latitude around the world. And in this one, I've been talking about Portugal and Western Australia, same sort of climate as California, is where we're thinking of what are the solutions there within the permaculture syllabus, so to speak. I think if people are doing a PDC in the city, of course they have to know how food's grown in rural areas, and even know when they take a drive to the country, you could keyline this farm. But they don't need to know that much. Their examples and their tests and their understanding needs to be on their environment. And people with massive disasters, all their exercises and design tasks need to be about where they are. So you're still teaching a similar syllabus, but according to the place, you're saying for where you are, what do you take from that you can apply? I think it has to be a little more like that and a little more reciprocity. And there could be things coming that we don't know about. So I was very worried it would get fixed into the one sort of model of permaculture for people who've got land or 5 acres and going to have their dream. And it needed to stretch. And there'll be other things. And possibly, always concerned me there isn't a principle for water. And yet water is the subject at which every permaculturist must excel, because there'll be too much, too little, too often, everything. Unless we excel in that, the disasters will be terrible and ongoing. And it can't just be put under energy. It has to be seen as water. H2O in any of its forms. And that worries me a bit. Perhaps the thing about store, use, restore, or reclaim, or renew, or something, but it has to be done at some time when people absolutely understand it's water that is the main theme that all permaculturists will work with in the future.
Wow. I think we were talking earlier, Wes, Margie and I, about, I think Bill Mollison also said that if you do anything, collect rainwater.
We also have to account for floods too. Rising seas, water in all its forms. So really, Holland has put back 100,000 trees along its levee banks simply as a holding mechanism. And it's that sort of action that's required. So there's one form of water. We're having floods now that haven't been seen in 10,000 years, and they're more damaging than 12 million acres of fire, though perhaps not as terrifying, but just as more damaging in the long term. So how, as permaculturists, do we operate? We talk about the moment it stopped raining is probably the next drought. We're coming in summer, it's just stopped raining. We're starting to prepare again for fires. So what is it? It's all about water. I'm starting to think we shouldn't be clearing so much. We should be having a wetter landscape, which would be recycling more grey water through topsoils and soft green stuff, rather than trying to clear everything, because that just ends us up with deserts with dusty winds and faster moving winds. So, trying to rethink, but none of those things I've been talking about a fixed permaculture principles that you must do. These are things that come out of bushfire zones or recommendations with others, but they're things that we need to be considering in design. I won't consider a design now unless it shows how it's putting water back into the subsoil and the aquifer and the water table. It's not enough just to save it in your tank. Where are you putting it in the ground where you live? Because all that's being depleted so much. So, you know, it's a way of thinking, I think. But yes, I can't see the principles of it. Some may go, some may come back. Perhaps bring food production back to the cities might have to come back as a major one when we've got 70% of people living in cities. Just some thoughts. It's the way I think.
Yes, it's great. Now, that was one of my questions was about water. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. And really quickly, for those who may not know what Principle Zero is, I think that really encourages us as permaculture practitioners and teachers to acknowledge and learn from traditional Indigenous ecological knowledge and local community members and honor the place-based knowledge already present in the community. And so I think that around the world, there were many traditional ways of dealing with water that we could learn from now.
Yeah, I think what many people did, they actually allowed rivers to flood. And that was really, really important. And that's an anathema to an engineer who wants a straight channel running to the sea. So about that first one, look, I was just in Portugal. So the Greeks wiped out the Iberians about 3000 BC. There are no traditional people in that sense. Certainly the Greeks started it and others started colonizing and came in. But there's a very long history of destruction of ecosystems and who the original people were outside more colonized countries like Australia and America. So when you're in the Middle East, to say who were the first people and what they do is difficult. I think we have to look at Indigenous communities, and as I said, they have mainly maintained and kept safe and healthy environments, but not a lot of restoration. So we have to refine our questions and understanding so that when we talk about cultural burning, when 12 million hectares have been burnt at temperatures up to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and so many animals lost, when do we burn again? Cultural knowledge can't tell us. This is a new situation. If we want to revegetate many of the farms that have now been treated with artificial chemicals for 200 years and eaten by goats and sheep and things, how do you do that? That wasn't within the experience of Indigenous people. So what we have to do is really be refined about collecting the knowledge and asking for knowledge where it fits. Someone said to me, but we were a stolen generation and we weren't allowed to speak our language. We actually don't know that much. And I think it's then a very hard thing to expect people to understand what to do in a country that for 400 or 600 years has had its natural ecosystem so severely disrupted. It's for everyone to work on. I really do. But I think the questions of what the land was, what it has been, what it could be, how Indigenous and traditional people lived is a very big one for all of us to ask, and perhaps be asking them in a spirit of reconciliation and restoration.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I wanted to discuss a bit that the book talks a bit about is the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and what is permaculture's role in this?
The book had to be sent to the UN. It was a lot to find the people who read it, and they read it and gave their stamp of approval, which I was curious about but not invested in. If they'd said no, I wouldn't have cared, but they liked it. What I realised is with the SDGs, there's a website, and we're starting to put permaculture projects up there so they can see how many permaculture projects have been in the past, which they can draw on, which practice SDGs of various forms. So with the decade of ecosystem restorations, I said what permaculture does is restoration. We'd never cut down a forest to make a farm. Well, I hope not. That was a permaculture. We would be taking some degraded land, hopefully, or someone else's land, and building it all the time, building soils and water storage and biodiversity. So I can't, as I said before, what else is restorative in the same way? And although permaculture said, let's create our separate, model, I think it's now time to work with these organizations who are trying very hard. I don't agree with all the parts of all the SDGs, but you don't have to work with someone. We just simply will work with others going the same way because it's urgent and necessary. And if we want to cooperate, not compete. So let's get on with it.
Yes, it's time. And Margie and Wes, before we close out, do you have any other questions?
I just have a comment, Wes and I are enjoying being elders so much and want to share that with those younger than us. And we love the intergenerational through the years that permaculture has allowed for us. And since Rosemary, we've walked through the last 20 plus years together. Wonder what your feelings about that, and reciprocally sharing back and forth with younger people. We're all elders in the making. That's a thing that we share often with younger people, that nobody, it's something to look forward to. And all of us are elders in the making. It's actually a wonderful time to share with others.
Look, I am with you there 120%. I think it's fabulous to be in that position. I don't really like the word wisdom, but I do like the word sort of considered experience or thinking. And I love working with younger people who are enthusiastic. And I always give my name and phone number and email and say, contact me. And part of what I'm doing is trying to enlist young ones, as young as 18 to 22, to start teaching other young ones and even older people. I think the younger ones are the ones who are going to have to pick up after us in a big way. And I think they're doing it already. A lot of them are. I know so many wonderful young ones. I think we have to give them airspace. I think roll over. Apparently, Bill Mollison had a final principle, which was give space to young Indigenous people and young people with talent. Make room for them, give them opportunities. So I usually take them with me when I go, give them a chance at teaching or learning or something, and they are wonderful. Wonderful. I just can't say it too much. They're terrific. Yeah, and I quite like the role. I just like to be sitting back a bit more. I'm still doing a bit much. And love to talk to you two again and just have a little elders chat. We should dig a few of us up and have a permaculture elders forum someday.
Yeah, that would be great. Oh my gosh.
That would be good. We will do that.
All right.
Your book, The Earth Restorer's Guide to Permaculture, was just revised and updated. And it really is a design manual for our climate, our unstable future. And for people who want to order the book, I think people can find you online at bluemountainpermacultureinstitute.com.au and permacultureforrefugees.org.
So it really is Meliadora Publications. They'd be the ones to contact, not those other websites. They're dealing with education, permaculture education, and with refugees.
Rosemary, is there anything that we didn't chat about today that you want to add?
Well, probably dozens of things, but I think for today it's probably a bit exhausting to even take on that many of ideas and some discursive conversation. Except thank you for inviting me on the show. It's lovely. And especially seeing Wes and Margie, that's just the cream on the cake. Just lovely.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And I just had one last thing to ask you. Would you say that you're hopeful about the future?
Friend of mine that does the bigfix.org, which is Liz Bastian, Solutions Journalism, Liz looks across the world at everything, and she said she thinks that sort of what you'd call in Quaker terms the ocean of darkness, the ocean of light are about evenly balanced at the moment. And so if I look at what I see and what I read, I do not have hope. If I understand from experience, it's not wisdom, is that change can come from anywhere. Absolutely anywhere. No one actually foresaw the mobile phone. No one thought of planes being up there. Even my mother's generation, there's so much that comes from left field that we can't see, that we need to be ready to catch it and run with it. And the other thing, because I'm an ant, aren't I, on the earth, and I'm blinkered, I can't see what is coming, what possible. But I do think it's fabulous to work somewhere that's part of the solutions. That's the thing that's really good, that saying to people all the time, well, what's your solution and what are you doing? And come on, we can get on with this. I think that's the hopeful thing, is that we do have answers and we have the potential to do it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing some of those solutions and answers with us today. I really appreciate all of you being here. I feel honored to have gotten to spend the past hour with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill.
And Wes, we'll line up a time to talk, and thank you very much for this. It was lovely. As I said, it's made my day.
Yay.
Gorgeous. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Cheers.
You've been listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. You can find us online at sustainableworldradio.com and also on iTunes. For more information about permaculture and ecology, visit the Sustainable World Media YouTube channel, where you'll find videos about permaculture, aquaponics, organic gardening, rainwater harvesting, and much, much more. Sustainable World Radio is a listener-supported program. If you like what we do, please consider making a donation to the show. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier, and thank you so much for listening.